The overall project of Montauk was under the Phoenix Project heading. Project Phoenix came into being approximately 1953 and was actually used as a cover for the ongoing Invisibility Project, which had gone through several name changes. Actually, it started out as Project Rainbow, then was Project Mirage, and then in 53 they changed it to Project Phoenix. Phoenix was a huge cover, if you will, a huge tent to cover many different projects, and it's still in use today as that under that name. So yes, Phoenix was the cover for that.
So you'd have Phoenix 1, Phoenix 2, Phoenix 3.
You could well have, yes, and there probably was for that project because it went through many phases. It's the original one, as they had it, which was using the radar tower as the element for focusing the energy in order to produce the tunnel effect, the time tunnel or the time transfer from point A to wherever. And I might add, for the basis of those who don't understand it, well, did they have a receiver at the other end? No, they did not. It was a very interesting and unique system, and this is why the aliens designed it this way, and why apparently they knew how to do it, and we didn't. We would have thought about, you got to have a transmitter here and a receiver there, which says you got to have a receiver at every point where you want to go. It wasn't necessary with this system. The tunnel became the transceiver, if you will. You go into one end, all of the equipment is at one end, and it focuses the energy on down to whatever point you choose to have it go to, and the product, or I should say the transfer, of whether it's hardware, material, personnel, or both, will go through this tunnel and materialize out at the other end, not actually dematerializing in the tunnel, but going through what you would call an extended artificial wormhole, and will come out at the other end, wherever they wanted it. And the reverse would take place if you wanted that person, group, or hardware to come back. You reverse the phase of the thing, so it would pick them up from that end and bring them back to Montauk.
So you're talking about actually fulfilling one of the goals of the Montauk Project, and that was to build this time tunnel, right?
Yes.
And when do you think that time tunnel was actually completed, built?
The first working system that was tested, from my recollection, was right around 76. It might have been slightly earlier, but 76 was the point where they were doing their first experimental work. Now, I might add, prior to that, there was another aspect of this, which was sort of overlapping and, of course, was in a partial sense independent. And that was the use of the Montauk chair and the psychics to see whether or not, through the computer systems and understanding of reality, you could make a thought reality. In other words, have somebody sitting in the chair, whether it's Duncan or someone else, think of an object, and could you create this through the computer system and the understanding of reality as the aliens gave it to us and we can put it into our computers? Could you take a thought and make a physical object out of it? If a person thought of a chair, could they create a chair through this transmitter system as an actual physical reality? They did. They were able to do this quite well. At first, when you shut the transmitter off, the thing disappeared. It was a non-permanent thing. Mm-hmm. They finally determined how, and they were able to make a permanent object.
Well, what are some things that were actually thought into an existence?
Typically, they thought of a chair, they thought of a table. I don't know what other objects they might have thought of.
Gold?
They could have.
Mm-hmm.
They could have thought of a number of things. It was more or less of a game at first, just to see whether you could do it. And when they found out they could, it stopped there, because the next phase beyond that was, of course, to see if you could transport an object through the tunnel system. Mm-hmm. And that was, of course, the main goal.
So was the chair the first part of the project for the time tunnel? You had to develop the chair first, and then you were ready to develop the time tunnel? Or did they work together?
Yes, it worked together, but you also had to have the chair and the computer electronics working in the earlier phase, which was the reality manipulation, or create a real object from a thought form. Mm-hmm. That was a precursor to the whole thing, because if you could do that, it meant then you could undoubtedly modify this thing so that an object, if I can say it this way, an object could be, in a sense, transferred into a thought form and sent down the tunnel and recreated the other end. That was some of the original thinking. But it actually came out that the tunnel was refined to the point where you sent the object physically with no alteration right through the tunnel to the other end. You didn't have to uncreate it, such as in Beam Me Up Spock or Beam Me Down in the Star Trek model. De-atomize it, put it into some kind of a waveform, and recreate it at the bottom end.
You just throw it in the tunnel.
We just rode right through the tunnel without any alteration.
Give our listeners sort of a picture view of what this chair looked like with all the gadgetry around it.
The chair was very much like what you would envision as a captain's chair on an aircraft, maybe a dentist chair minus the dental appliances, a comfortable reclining chair, which could be tilted, and you could recline comfortably because the operator in that chair, who was a very sensitive psychic, had to be comfortable. And they weren't strapped in, they were just laid down in the chair, and they would tilt back, and they were put into their proper operating state. And around it, in fact, the chair would have coils wound into it for picking up the body energies, and the early system used a form of antenna very much like a delta T antenna. And when I say delta T, let me describe what a delta T antenna is. Envision a pyramid like the Great Pyramid of Egypt with a apex up on top. Then take away the pyramid and just look at the four corners, like you had 4 rods coming from the apex down to the base, and around the base you had 4 more rods in a square in the actual shape and form of the pyramid with the same angles. Now this would be a device where you had the form, but in addition to the form, you had coils wound around it.
Isn't that half a tetrahedron?
Perhaps you could call it that.
Yes.
Because in the original form, we only used half of them, of the delta T. Actually, it was the 1/2 section. The full delta T required coils and XYZ axis, where you had the 2 of them base to base, so that you had 2 apexes out here, and you had the 2 bases facing each other. But that was not for pickup. That was for another purpose. To pick up the energies of the psychic in the chair, you had one conical pyramidal type structure, which was wound with coils for energy pickup. They weren't to put any energy out, they were to absorb the energy coming out from the psychic. They did it in many ways. They tried many different systems, but basically it was to pick up XYZ coordinate energies from the person's head, because the human head does radiate energy, both electric field and magnetic, and you had to pick these up with very sensitive amplifiers. They used cryogenic amplifiers at first. They had to have very, very low noise levels. Then they finally shifted to something which was picking up certain specific bands at RF.
How far away from the subject's head were these devices?
The coils were basically within 2 to 3 feet of their body. As far as the head was concerned, they wanted to get them as close as possible, so typically they're about between 1 foot and 18 inches.
So the psychic didn't wear a hat or anything?
No, they did not wear a hat. There were some experiments done with that, using a helmet. That didn't work too well, because it was too uncomfortable with the psychic, and if they were uncomfortable, they didn't function properly. They had to be completely comfortable, they had to be in a state of reverie, and you couldn't have any physical distraction from that state. And a helmet was a physical distraction, and anything too close to them is a physical distraction, because they can sense the coils out there if they're too close. So that was a setup, and there was XYZ coordinate coils. These energies, which were very low level, but nevertheless there, were amplified, and they went through their own processing system, and eventually they were fed into the computers. Now, how did this work? You can't just pick a psychic up off the street, pardon the expression, but pick up a sensitive and psychic and say, we're going to train you to do this, and have them sit down on the chair, have them think of something, like, for example, creating the chair, a physical chair from the person's thought form. You can't just say to the psychic, think of a chair, and then automatically a chair appears, because the computers will not of themselves understand the person's thought processes. The person has to think, if you pardon the expression, in computerese. They have to think in a form which the computer recognizes. Now, this required additional training. All of those sensitives, all of those chair psychics, if I may call them that, had to go through a very special training process in another location down off the shores of the Potomac, which we call the Potomac Facility. It was called by various names. In that facility, there was some very special training processes, and it was, I don't know how long that place was in operation. It's still in operation today, as far as I know. But it was there at the time when we needed it. And what it did, it took people in, put them through special computer training systems, high-speed training, plus capabilities of exciting and improving the thinking capacity of the brain, which required certain chemicals being injected into their systems, and going through literally 5 phases of this kind of training. If anyone has seen the movie, the
Lawnmower Man.
The Lawnmower Man, that is exactly the kind of facility I'm talking about, because that was based on the actual facilities of the Potomac that we had down there.
Yeah.
And I went through it because I had to know exactly what these guys were going to go through, made some improvements on me. But it was cut off at a certain point. They didn't want the people to go too far.
Are you saying you actually went through that facility?
I went through the training facility itself. I went through the training so that I would know what Duncan and all the others had to go through and what the effect was. So theoretically, I could sit in the chair and do the same thing.
Did you ever go in the chair yourself?
I don't recall that I did, other than for a test program just to see if the equipment was working.
Okay.
However, they had to do this because what it did, it gave them the ability to understand computer language, whatever form you wanted to use, whether it's COBOL or any of the others.
Yeah. How in the world do you think like a computer?
You don't normally. That's the problem.
That's what I'm trying to... I mean,
normally a human doesn't, but you see, if they put them in the proper state of reverie, you access their subconscious, plug in a certain program, a series of them, in fact. It's mind control of another level. It's mind control where they're not controlling the mind, you're giving the mind new abilities.
So
that the person can think in the normal form when they're in their normal state of mind, like they're normally conscious and talking like you and I. Mm-hmm. But if they were to be used for this program, they were put in a special state of mind where they accessed this training in the subconscious, where any thought that they were given, any idea which was presented to them, was converted into a computerized format. As I say, whether it's COBOL or any other program, didn't matter. Whatever the program they wanted to use, it came out of their minds in the subconscious level. This was picked up by the coils, and this was understandable by the computers. They had to think in a computer language. And this was done at a subconscious level, not the normal conscious level.
And to your knowledge, about how many people were trained that you worked with to run this chair?
There were at least 6 that I know of, but I was told there were a lot more than that as time went on. I would give an estimate, because it was not everyone that could be trained to this. They were specially selected to begin with. I would give a hypothetical guess at this. Is about 20. I knew about 6. Mm-hmm. But there could have been more, or there could have been less than that.
Is Duncan the only one that you remember the name of?
No, there was one other that was used in that program. In fact, there are 3 I know of that were used in that program. One I have more or less track of today. The 3rd I've lost track of. Another man that may have been involved in that program I've met occasionally in Long Island, but he became involved in some side issue because some of these guys had multiple talents. In fact, some of these people using the chair did have multiple talents, and they used them elsewhere. They didn't believe in just using a single talent. If you were multi-talented, they used them all. One of them, as I think of now, was a guy who was known as the drummer. He was in one of the bands down there. They had some very good musical bands that did a lot of recording, but this had nothing to do with the chair, except that some of the people in the chair had other things they did. Some of it was for pure recreation.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Do you want to keep those names sort of quiet at this point?
Basically, yes, at this point.
Okay.